Mom stole my inheritance while I was a kid, now she wants my help. When my mom married her new husband, I was 12. Dad had been gone for about 4 years by then. I was still getting used to the idea of him not being around, and honestly, it just felt weird seeing Mom with someone else. The new husband wasn't bad or anything, and he seemed okay enough. But things changed when he moved in, bringing his toddler daughter with him. The little girl was maybe 2 or 3, and right from the start, she was like the center of their universe. Suddenly, everything in our house started revolving around her. I was still dealing with losing my dad, so it wasn't like I was super excited to suddenly have this new family thrust upon me. I mean, it was only 4 years since Dad died, and I was still trying to figure things out. I'd catch Mom looking at me, almost like she felt guilty, but she never really said anything about it. We just kinda went through the motions of trying to blend as a family, but it felt awkward, like we were all just pretending to be okay with everything. The one thing I had left of my dad though was his engagement ring. That ring had been in our family for generations. My grandma gave it to him, and he'd always said it was meant to be passed down. It was the last piece of him that I could hold on to. A bit of family history I could keep close. I wore it on a necklace because it was a little too big for my fingers. Every time I looked at it, it was like a little reminder that Dad was still with me somehow. About a year after Mom remarried, her new husband's daughter, the toddler, was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. I didn't really understand what that meant back then, but I knew it was serious. The mood in the house went from tense to just heavy. Everything was about her treatments, her doctor visits, and whatever else she needed. I'd come home from school, and there'd be no one there because they were all at the hospital. I'd eat alone most nights, hearing the quietness of the house and just feeling more and more like an outsider. Then came the day when Mom sat me down in the living room with that serious look on her face. She told me they'd found an experimental treatment that might help the girl, but it wasn't available nearby. They'd have to stay somewhere else for a few months, and the costs were insane. Her new husband's family wasn't in the picture, and they didn't have much savings. So they were looking for other ways to pay for it. She looked at me all serious and asked if we could sell Dad's engagement ring. I didn't understand at first. Like, what did that have to do with anything? That ring was mine, left to me in his will. It wasn't just some fancy jewelry to sell whenever. It was like the only thing I had left of him. When I told her that, she sighed, then said something like, "This treatment could save her life. It's not like it's just for fun or something." And I remembered just sitting there staring at her, wondering if she really thought it was okay to just take that away from me. She tried to say it was for a greater good, that it was about saving a life. And, I mean, yeah, I get that, but I was just a kid myself, barely 13, and she was asking me to give up the one thing that still connected me to my dad. I didn't know how to explain that to her without sounding selfish, which is exactly what she called me when I tried. I told her I wouldn't forgive her if she sold it, that she'd be taking something away from me that I could never get back. But she didn't listen. The next thing I knew, the ring was gone, sold off for $14,000. $14,000 was all it took for her to sell away the last thing I had of my dad. She tried to talk to me about it later, but I wouldn't hear it. To me, it was like she'd just stolen something that didn't belong to her, something that meant way more to me than she'd ever understand. After that, things got weird between us. I pulled away from her, started keeping to myself more. I'd see her with her new family, with her husband and his daughter, and it was like watching her live this new life that didn't include me. Every time I looked at her, I felt this anger building up inside me. I'd catch myself wanting to scream at her to tell her how much I hated her for what she did, but I held it in. I figured it didn't matter. She'd made her choice. For a while, I just tried to focus on school and friends, anything to distract myself. But that feeling of betrayal didn't go away. I'd come home every day, see them all together, and feel like an outsider in my own house. She'd already chosen her new family over me, and that ring was just the final proof of it. Even when they'd go off for her treatments and leave me home alone, it wasn't like I felt relieved. I was just there in this house full of memories that didn't mean anything to anyone else. I stopped talking to her about anything important. If she asked about school, I'd just give short answers. When she'd try to make plans to do something together, I'd brush her off, pretending I was busy or didn't feel like it. Part of me hoped she'd notice, that she'd realize what she'd done and apologize, but she never did. She'd just keep trying to make it work, acting like nothing was wrong. By the time I was getting close to 18, I was already planning my escape. I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Every time I thought about how she'd sold Dad's ring, it felt like a fresh wound, like she'd chosen her new family's needs over my right to have something that connected me to him. I started saving every little bit I could, planning my exit. I wanted out of there, far away from a place that didn't feel like home anymore. I guess some people might say I was overreacting, but when you're 13 and someone takes something so important from you, it messes with your head. It's not just about the ring itself. It's about what it stood for. That ring was my link to a family I'd lost. A memory of a dad I could barely remember clearly. Losing it felt like losing him all over again, and no one understood that, especially not my mom. The years after my mom sold the ring were strange. I thought maybe I'd get used to it. Like, eventually, I'd be able to let it go and move on, but that just didn't happen. If anything, the anger and resentment kept building up. Every time I looked at my mom, I'd just see the person who chose someone else's kid over her own, who took the one thing left of my dad and gave it away like it was nothing. And it didn't help that in those years, I felt like I was just there, a shadow in their new family. I figured out pretty quick that I couldn't depend on her for support or really anything. There were days I'd come home, and they wouldn't even be there. They'd be off at a hospital visit or staying with friends near the treatment center, leaving me alone to fend for myself. They tried to set me up with meals and stuff, like they'd leave frozen dinners in the freezer or sometimes ask a neighbor to check in on me, but it always felt like an afterthought. Like, they had their priorities, and I just wasn't one of them. And let me tell you, it was hard to shake off that feeling of being forgotten. I'd sit in that quiet house knowing they were out there trying to save her, and I'd just get angrier. Angry that they'd left me to take care of myself, angry that mom didn't seem to care. And mostly angry that this was supposed to be my home. But it didn't feel like one. It was like I was a stranger under my own roof. I decided pretty early on that I was getting out of there as soon as I could. I started working part-time jobs, saving up whatever I could. I mowed lawns, babysat, and eventually worked at a grocery store after school and on weekends. It wasn't much, but it was something. My plan was simple. Hit 18, save up enough, and get out. I didn't want any more reminders of what I'd lost or what she'd done. When I hit my senior year, things got even more strained. My mom would occasionally try to have these mother-daughter talks where she'd tell me how proud she was of me, how she knew I was going to do great things. But at that point, it just sounded like empty words. I wasn't some little kid anymore, and she couldn't just patch things up with a few "I'm proud of you" comments. And she never once apologized or admitted she'd messed up. I kept waiting, hoping that maybe she'd say she was sorry, that she'd see the damage she'd done. But she never did. It was like she thought it was all fine now. Like she just moved on from everything, so I should too. I remember one day she tried to talk to me about college. She asked if I'd thought about where I wanted to go or what I wanted to study. I shrugged her off, told her I didn't know yet. The truth was, I didn't want to talk to her about my future because, in my mind, she wasn't really part of it. I was planning to move out, start my life on my own terms, and I didn't want her involved. I'd been on my own for so long. I'd learned how to be independent, and the thought of her trying to play mom now just felt insulting. As graduation got closer, the tension between us was at an all-time high. She kept trying to act like everything was normal, like we were just a regular mother and daughter dealing with typical teen parent issues, but we weren't, not by a long shot. I couldn't even look at her without feeling that same flash of anger. And I think she knew it because she'd look at me sometimes with this sad, almost defeated expression, like she knew she'd lost something but couldn't figure out what. I saved every penny I could from my jobs, determined to leave as soon as I could. I didn't care where I'd go, just that it would be somewhere I could finally breathe, somewhere I didn't have to keep living in this strange shadow of a family. The closer I got to 18, the more restless I felt, like I was counting down the days until I'd be free. The night before I moved out, I remember packing up my stuff in my room, looking around at the walls, and thinking about all the memories that I was leaving behind. It was bittersweet. This had been my home, the place where I grew up, where I spent the happiest years with my dad. But it wasn't that place anymore, not since she'd sold his ring, not since she'd chosen them over me. Mom tried to talk to me before I left. She stood there in the doorway, hands in her pockets, looking like she wanted to say something profound. But all she managed was, "I know we've had our differences, but you'll always be my daughter." I just nodded, gave her this forced smile, and didn't say anything back. I didn't want to get into it with her, didn't want to drag out the goodbye. In my head, she'd lost the right to call me her daughter the moment she sold that ring. So I packed my stuff, threw my bags in the car, and left without looking back. I'd saved up enough to get a small apartment. It wasn't much, just a cramped little place with barely enough room to swing a cat, but it was mine. And that meant everything. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. There was no constant reminder of the family I'd lost or the betrayal I'd felt. It was just me, my space, and the chance to start over. At first, being on my own was weird. I'd spent so many years fending for myself that actual independence felt surreal. But as the days passed, I started settling into a routine. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and it felt good, peaceful even. I didn't have to worry about mom or her new family. I didn't have to deal with their drama or the constant reminders of what had happened. Of course, mom tried to stay in touch. She'd call occasionally, leave these long voicemails asking how I was doing, telling me she missed me. I ignored most of them. Sometimes I'd listen, but only out of curiosity. Part of me kept waiting for her to say she was sorry, that she'd realized she'd messed up and wanted to make things right, but that apology never came. It was always the same old, "I miss you," or "I just want to hear from you." Like, she couldn't understand why I'd left or why I didn't want to talk to her. After a few months, I got my first real job, something that paid enough to let me keep the apartment and cover my bills. Life was simple, and I liked it that way. I didn't need anyone's pity or help. I'd made it on my own, and I was proud of that. It wasn't until much later that I realized just how much leaving had changed me. I was tougher, more guarded. I didn't let people in easily because I knew what it felt like to be betrayed by the ones you trusted most. But even with all that, there was still this tiny part of me that wanted closure, that wanted to know if she ever regretted what she'd done. But I wasn't going to wait around for that answer. I'd spent too long waiting on her to do the right thing, to be the mom I needed. I was done with that. Moving out wasn't just about getting my own space. It was about finally letting go of everything that had held me back. And as far as I was concerned, that was the best decision I'd ever made. I'd been on my own for a while by then. I got used to the peace, the independence, and, honestly, I didn't miss them. There was a certain freedom in being able to live without constantly thinking about family drama or wondering if mom would ever apologize. I was finally past it, or at least I thought I was. Then one day, completely out of the blue, I get a call from my mom. I'd almost forgotten what it sounded like when she said, "Hi, kiddo," in that awkward, fake cheerful voice she used whenever she had bad news. She didn't waste any time before diving into the reason for her call, telling me her husband's daughter was sick again, that the cancer was back. She sounded strained, like she was already bracing herself for what she'd have to ask. And I knew deep down that there was only one reason she'd reach out after all this time. Turns out I was right. After all these years, she was asking for money. My own mom was calling me, not to apologize, not to make things right, but to ask for a handout to help her new family. She gave me this whole speech about how they were drowning in medical bills, how things were tight, and that every little bit would help. She mentioned the money she'd saved up for me before she got remarried. It wasn't a lot, just a few $1,000s she'd set aside for my future back when I was little. But she was hoping I'd pitch in. It felt like a slap to the face. I asked her straight up why she thought I'd want to help after everything. She stumbled over her words, trying to explain that she thought maybe enough time had passed and that surely I didn't still hold a grudge. She said it was for a good cause, that I had the chance to make a difference. Like this was all some noble gesture, not another way for her to bail herself out of the mess she made. I didn't hold back. I told her exactly what I thought, that she had no right to ask me for anything after selling my dad's ring. I said it was insulting that she even thought I'd consider it, especially after she'd never bothered to apologize. She kept trying to say I was being unreasonable, that I should let go of the past. She sounded like she genuinely believed I was in the wrong for being upset about the ring. And then she started bringing up her stepdaughter's condition, saying how she didn't deserve this and how I should be compassionate. I told her compassion goes both ways. I reminded her how she chose them over me, over my dad's memory, and then acted like everything was fine afterward. She got quiet, which I thought meant she'd finally understood. But, no, she just sighed and said, "I wish you could let it go." That was the moment I knew she'd never really get it. Then her husband started calling me. He'd text, leave voicemails, even send emails, all trying to guilt trip me. He'd say stuff like, "It's not about you, it's about saving a child's life, and we're family. We should help each other." I guess he thought that bringing up the family card would somehow make me cave, but honestly, it had the opposite effect. Every message just reminded me how they'd thrown me aside when I was still a kid. I was family now that they needed money, but back then, I was just an inconvenience to be brushed off. After ignoring him for a while, he tried a new approach. One day, he left this long, drawn-out voicemail about how the ring had saved his daughter's life and how I should be grateful that it went to something so meaningful. The audacity of it left me speechless. He was seriously trying to twist it like I was the bad guy for wanting to keep my dad's last gift. I didn't even respond to that one. I just deleted it and blocked his number. It didn't end there, though. Somehow, he got the rest of the family involved. Aunts, uncles, even cousins who barely knew me growing up, they all started chiming in. Some messaged me directly. Others just posted passive-aggressive stuff on social media about family values and putting others first. It was a circus, and it was exhausting. I ended up deleting a bunch of my social media profiles just to get some peace. One night though, I got a message from my grandmother. She's usually pretty chill, keeps to herself. But this time, she'd clearly been roped into the mess. She wrote this long, awkward message about how family needs to stick together and that my mom's stepdaughter was going through an unspeakably hard time. I felt bad for her, but I was tired of being guilted. I sent a simple reply explaining that my mom had already chosen her family years ago when she sold the ring and that she didn't get to come crawling back now just because they were short on cash. She didn't respond after that, and I could tell it had stung, but I wasn't about to apologize for setting boundaries. Things hit a new low when I ran into my mom's husband in public. I was grabbing some groceries, minding my own business, and he just appeared out of nowhere, standing right in front of me in the middle of the aisle. At first, I thought he'd just walk by or pretend not to see me, but no, he went straight into his speech about how selfish I was, how disgusting it was that I could even think about keeping the money while his daughter was fighting for her life. I was done holding back. I told him that the ring had meant more to me than he or his daughter ever could, and that he was lucky I hadn't taken legal action when my mom sold it. I reminded him that it was my right to keep whatever money I had and that if he needed funds so badly, there were other ways to get help. He looked at me like I was the devil, muttered something under his breath, and stormed off. I could feel people staring, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let him bully me into giving up the last bit of security I had. Walking out of that store, I felt weirdly relieved. For so long, I'd held all that anger in. Let it simmer under the surface. But finally, I'd stood up for myself. I'd drawn a line, told him exactly where I stood, and didn't back down. And, yeah, maybe it felt a little ruthless, but it was better than just sitting back and letting them guilt trip me. After that, things quieted down for a bit. The call stopped, and I didn't get any more messages from random family members. I think they realized I wasn't going to budge. But there was still this nagging feeling, this little voice in the back of my head that kept asking if I was in the wrong. I mean, yeah, they'd hurt me, and they had no right to ask for my money. But part of me still wondered if I was being too harsh. Maybe I'd just gotten so used to being angry that I'd forgotten what it was like to feel anything else. It was a hard thing to shake, that guilt. Even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, I still couldn't help questioning myself. That's the thing about family. They know exactly where to hit you, where it'll hurt the most. And even when you're standing up for yourself, there's this part of you that wonders if they're right. But in the end, I had to remind myself that I'd spent years putting up with their choices, their disregard for my feelings, and I wasn't going to let them pull me back in. I'd finally started to build a life for myself, and I wasn't about to let them tear that down just because they didn't like my answer. So I stuck to my guns, blocked them again, and moved on. At least, that's what I kept telling myself I was doing. After the grocery store confrontation with my mom's husband, I thought things might finally calm down. I told him straight up how I felt, and I figured that maybe, just maybe, they'd get the message and leave me alone. But if anything, things only got worse. Within a few days, it was like the whole extended family had decided to form some kind of intervention. Everyone suddenly had an opinion on what I should do and how I needed to make things right. I'd see these random texts from family members I hadn't heard from in years, all talking about how family helps family. A few of them went on about how unforgiving I was being and that grudges only poison the person holding them. It felt like they were reading from the same script, probably fed by my mom or her husband. It was like they turned me into the villain, the person who was too cold-hearted to help a sick child, which wasn't even close to the truth. The worst part was when they started tagging me in posts on social media. I'd see these guilt-trippy quotes on my feed, like, "When we're gone, all we have is family," or "A heart that forgives is a heart that heals." I'd roll my eyes so hard I could practically see my own brain. Eventually, I decided to delete a bunch of them. I didn't need that kind of pressure or manipulation. But, of course, that led to more drama with people messaging me saying stuff like, "How could you delete me? You're acting like a stranger to your own family." It got so ridiculous that I just started ignoring everything, but they kept pushing. A few days later, I got a long email from my mom's sister, who I barely spoke to even before all this. She wrote about how family was all we had in this world and that I should show some compassion. She actually had the nerve to tell me that I was too young to understand, as if I hadn't lived through my own experience and had my own feelings about it. It was like no one could see my side, like I was just supposed to put aside years of hurt and betrayal because they suddenly decided it was convenient. But the thing that really set me off was a group message from my mom's parents. My grandparents were always a little distant with me, mostly because they'd been close to my mom's husband from the beginning and thought he'd breathed new life into her after my dad passed away. They basically saw him as a savior and acted like his daughter was just as much their granddaughter as I was. But in this message, they took it a step further. They wrote about how they understood that I was still hurt, but that I needed to let go of the past. They talked about how my mom's stepdaughter was like family and how as her older sibling, I had a responsibility to support her during this hard time. They finished it off by saying, "We know your dad would want you to do the right thing." That was it for me. That last line about my dad was like a punch to the gut. Here they were, using my dad's memory, something they barely respected in the first place, to try to guilt me into giving them money. I remember just staring at the screen, feeling this mix of rage and sadness. It was like they didn't just take away the last piece of him when they sold the ring. Now they were dragging his memory into this mess just to make me feel guilty. I sat down that night and wrote out a response. I wasn't going to keep quiet anymore. I told them that they had no right to bring my dad into this, that they had no idea what he would have wanted because they barely acknowledged him after he was gone. I reminded them that the ring had been mine and mine alone, and that my mom had no right to sell it. I laid it all out, the hurt, the betrayal, everything. And I told them that if they didn't respect my decision to stay out of their mess, I'd have no choice but to cut contact. I hit send and just sat there feeling this weird sense of relief. I didn't know how they'd respond, but I didn't care. For the first time, I'd actually told them how I felt instead of bottling it up. But, of course, the fallout came almost immediately. First, my grandma sent this half-hearted apology saying she was sorry I felt that way, which is the kind of non-apology that basically means, sorry you're upset, but I'm not changing anything. Then, one by one, family members started dropping like flies. People blocked me, unfriended me, and my phone got quieter. I wasn't going to lie, it hurt. But it was also like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I didn't have to keep defending myself or dealing with the constant manipulation. Then my mom showed up at my door. I hadn't seen her in months, maybe a year by that point. I wasn't expecting it. So when I opened the door and saw her standing there, I froze. She looked older, more worn down, like all the drama had taken a toll on her. But the second she opened her mouth, I knew she hadn't come to make things right. "I thought you'd at least have the decency to talk to me face to face," she said, looking around like she didn't really want to be there. I crossed my arms, leaning against the door frame. "Talk about what? You made your choice a long time ago," she sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "I'm doing everything I can to help your sister," she said. That word, sister, made my blood boil. I told her flat out that she wasn't my sister, that she was her husband's daughter, and nothing more. She looked at me like I'd slapped her, but I wasn't about to back down. After all this time, I wasn't going to let her rewrite history just because it suited her. "Why can't you just let it go?" she asked, shaking her head. "You're holding on to a grudge over a ring." "It wasn't just a ring," I snapped. "It was Dad's ring, and you sold it like it was nothing. And now you're coming back for more, acting like I owe you something." We stood there in silence for what felt like forever. Finally, she just looked down, sighed, and said, "You're not the person I raised." I laughed at that, a short bitter laugh. "No. I'm not. I'm the person you ignored for years while you built a new life with your new family. And now that it's falling apart, you're looking to me to fix it. I'm done, Mom. I'm done being your backup plan." Without another word, I stepped back, closed the door, and locked it. I watched from the window as she just stood there for a minute, looking lost, like she couldn't believe what had just happened. Eventually, she turned and walked away. Her shoulders slumped. It should have felt satisfying, maybe even triumphant, but it didn't. It just felt final. I sat down in my apartment feeling this strange mix of relief and sadness. It was like a chapter of my life had just ended, and I wasn't sure what would come next. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else guilt me into being part of their drama again. I'd fought too hard to get to where I was, and I wasn't about to let them drag me back down. For the first time, I actually felt free. I wasn't tangled up in their expectations or guilt trips anymore. I could just focus on myself, on moving forward. And while part of me would probably always wish things had been different, I knew I'd made the right choice. After shutting the door on my mom, it was like everything finally fell into place. For the first time in years, I didn't have that constant feeling of waiting for something, some apology or acknowledgement that was never going to come. I told her exactly how I felt, let it all out, and ended it on my own terms. And for the first time, I was genuinely done. The silence that followed was almost unsettling at first. After all the calls, messages, and guilt trips, I'd gotten used to the constant background noise of family drama. But now there was just peace. No random phone calls. No passive-aggressive social media posts from distant relatives. No one telling me how I was supposed to feel. Just me, my little apartment, and the life I'd built for myself. Of course, even with all that freedom, the doubts crept in sometimes. It's hard to walk away from people you've known your whole life no matter how much pain they caused. I'd think back to holidays or random weekends, the times my mom would actually be around, and I'd get hit with that weird feeling of nostalgia mixed with regret. But then I'd remember the last few years, the constant betrayal, and I'd snap out of it. I'd remind myself that I didn't need them to be happy. Work helped a lot. I threw myself into my job, put in the hours, and tried to build something for myself. And as time went on, I started making new friends, people who had no idea about all the drama and didn't look at me like I was the estranged daughter or the girl with family issues. It was refreshing, and it felt like I could finally move on without the weight of my past hanging over me. About a month after my last confrontation with my mom, I got a message from my aunt, one of the few people who hadn't picked a side in the whole mess. She'd always been a bit of a neutral party, someone who'd send a quick text on my birthday or check in every now and then, but never too involved. She said she just wanted to make sure I was doing all right, especially after all the family stuff. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Just let sleeping dogs lie. But another part of me was curious. So I messaged her back, keeping it casual. I told her things were fine, that I was focusing on work and keeping my distance from all the drama. She replied with a lot of "I understand," and that must have been hard, which felt a bit like she was trying to avoid saying too much. Then out of nowhere, she dropped a bombshell. Apparently, my mom and her husband had hit a financial rough patch. Between the medical bills, their other expenses, and whatever else they've been dealing with, they were stretched thin. My aunt didn't go into details, but she hinted that they were struggling more than I'd realized. They'd even put their house up for sale, probably to cover whatever debt they'd racked up from the treatments and everything else. Hearing that should have made me feel something. Maybe a bit of pity, maybe satisfaction, maybe even a pang of guilt, but honestly, I just felt nothing. It was like I'd reached the end of a story I'd stopped caring about a long time ago. I didn't wish them any harm, but I wasn't going to go running back to help them either. They'd made their choices, just like I'd made mine. My aunt wrapped up her message with, "I thought you should know. It's still family after all." And that part stuck with me for a while. What does family even mean when they treat you like an afterthought? When they only reach out because they need something, not because they actually care about you. I realized that just because we shared blood didn't mean I owed them anything. Family wasn't just about DNA. It was about people who actually had your back, who respected you and valued you, and that wasn't them. In the months that followed, I put my focus back on the people who had been there for me. My friends, the distant relatives who actually checked in out of genuine care, not out of obligation. I started to see that the family I chose was worth so much more than the one I was born into. My mom and her husband had taken enough from me over the years. I wasn't going to let them take my peace too. Eventually, the calls and messages faded completely. I guess they finally realized that I wasn't going to be their fallback, that they couldn't keep me on the hook with guilt or family loyalty, and I was okay with that. I'd spent too many years trying to be the daughter they wanted, waiting for them to see me, to value me. But those days were over. I was done waiting for something that was never coming. Sometimes people would ask me about my family, new friends, coworkers, people who didn't know the whole story. They'd say things like, "Are you close with your parents? Or do you have any siblings?" And I'd just smile and give a simple answer. No. It's just me. It was easier that way, and it felt right. I didn't need to explain the whole backstory or dive into all the drama. All they needed to know was that I was okay on my own. And honestly, I was more than okay. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally living for myself, not constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if my mom would finally come around. I didn't need her approval or her apologies. I'd given myself permission to let go, to move on, and that was all the closure I needed. By the time the year rolled around, I'd created a life that was entirely mine. My career was going well. I had a close-knit group of friends who felt more like family than my own ever did, and I'd finally found peace with everything that had happened. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I'd gone through it all, felt every bit of that pain, and come out stronger on the other side. Looking back, I realized that losing them had actually set me free. It forced me to find strength I didn't know I had, to stand up for myself in ways I never thought I could. And while it hadn't been easy, it was worth it. I was finally living on my own terms with people who actually cared about me. So here I am now, finally closing that chapter for good. No more wondering what if, no more waiting for apologies that would never come. Just me, living my life, free from all the weight I'd carried for so long. I may not have the family I once imagined, but I have a life I can be proud of, and that's enough for me.